Here with Tim Rosales and Tal Eslick, and I think the biggest thing that we start off by saying is our thoughts are with anyone who's affected by this series of fires. This is a podcast mostly focused on the Central Valley, but of course, I think everybody has connections in some form or fashion to Los Angeles, the area. And again, our thoughts are with the people down there. And when we have our discussion about this, I think it's important to know that we're just talking about issues that, of course, maybe secondary to rebuilding a home and the process that goes through that. But at the same time, too, there are things that are important to highlight because when we think about areas in California that have been overlooked for some time, we think about fire affected areas throughout most of California and the rest of California, and areas where damage and structure damage and structure destruction it amounts to greater numbers than what we saw in Los Angeles. That doesn't minimize anything that we've seen in Los Angeles, but it does highlight disparity at times of resources and what happens in response to fires like these. And most notably, it's the area we want to start with, which is CEQA. The governor deciding to put this executive order out to essentially suspend CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, for people that are looking to rebuild. It will help them build faster. Basically, it reduces the permitting process. There's some other things in this executive order that Governor Newsom put through, including any updates to building codes that may be, harmful as far as trying to rebuild some of these places that have been lost in the Palisades or the Altadena areas. When we want to dive into this first, I mean, for California homeowners that haven't been had damage from a fire, who are just trying to build, or builders too. Can you guys explain kind of what this whole process is like and why people have maybe been trying to knock down CEQA for some time, or at least reduce its impact as far as the criticism that it harms growth and the ability to build homes in a particular region? Tim, maybe to you first.
Sure. Well, CEQA's been around for quite a long time, and there's been discussion seemingly every legislative session about reform to the California Environmental Quality Act in order to build the housing that is needed in California and to update. It's something that most of the time it affects developers more than it does necessarily kind of individual homeowners per se. But in this case, obviously, we've got a situation where you have a massive catastrophe impacting thousands and thousands of homes in Southern California, some of which are there right on the coast. And you have CEQA as well as a California Coastal Commission that their oversight impacts how and how quickly and when these homes can rebuild. And so I think that's part of the governor's calculation here. And certainly he's been facing a lot of criticism over the last week in terms of his handling of the crisis. And I think that this is one attempt and certainly something that the governor can do and is well within his power to change, and in this instance to waive and hopefully earn some goodwill as well.
Yeah, tell your thoughts on that too.
Yeah, so like most laws, and certainly the environmental laws, I do think they were grounded in something noble and probably something that at the time was appropriate. However, CEQA specifically has been completely perverted and is used as a bludgeon for anyone trying, I mean, really anyone trying to do anything in California. They run headfirst right into CEQA. Now, the part that's disappointing and the part that I think we can draw a distinction between the disaster, the impact of the fires, and looking forward, CEQA has been exempted for other things. So there's a threshold that the California legislature and in some sense the governor has set to say this is okay to exempt CEQA and this is not. What's been okay was a stadium in Inglewood. And you could make the case, especially if you're from Inglewood or you're working on that project, that that's a very reasonable ask, was to exempt CEQA for something that's going to have a big impact in a traditionally challenging part of our state. However, there has not been CEQA exemptions for water infrastructure, for veg management, and any number of other things for housing. Any other number of things that are noble efforts, that are important, that are so desperately needed, and we're seeing that play out on the news this evening. That's a policy decision by whoever is in charge, whether it's doesn't even need to be partisan. Whoever is in charge today in California has said, stadiums, that's okay. This other stuff, not okay. So now looking into this situation, fires, which we've dealt with a number of times in the last decade, I mean, for a long time, but significant size fires in the last decade, especially, it appears that these neighborhoods, these communities in Southern California are above that line. So now they're with the stadiums. But other communities that have faced similar challenges and other fires remain below that line because they didn't get a CEQA exemption. That's where California voters should really dig in because that doesn't seem right from my perspective. And I don't think any reasonable person would say, well, why are these fires worse than other communities that were impacted? Except for the fact in many cases, these fires were very wealthy individuals and very wealthy neighborhoods. That's not an opinion. That is a fact just based on the demographics of these communities. That needs to be called into question, hopefully sooner than later.
Yeah, and that's an important note to make is that when we think about, I believe it was the campfire in 2018, I believe it's 18,000 structures destroyed is the number, or a little bit around that number. So far, what we know from the LA fires, both the Palisades and Eaton combined, are right around 3,000. Now, still an awful number, and we've been talking about that before. We want to emphasize the point, though. I think the point, maybe, Tal, to go back to you on this, is that this should be a precedent and not an exception, right?
Yeah, I would hope that this doesn't become just sort of like a both sides, this side's wrong, this side's right. Moving forward, if CEQA, and for that matter, other sort of red tape that will be set aside, it sounds like there's an interest in doing so on the part of the governor, red tape or this specific law, if it's CEQA, moving forward, are these laws appropriate anymore? If they're not, then change them. That's literally the job of the folks in Sacramento, right? So we don't need to wait for billions of dollars in impact or, communities being destroyed or people losing their lives and certainly their property. We can make these changes. We are them. So we can make those changes today. And if CEQA needs to be updated, then do it and do it now. Don't spend a decade debating what needs to be in the bucket of fixing CEQA. Do it today. They could choose to do that. They could call a special session today or repurpose the existing one and make those changes today. And if there's anyone along the way in the state bureaucracy that's pushing back against that, the governor has the bully pulpit to push them aside. And the interests in California that have elected large majorities can also be asked to step aside for the purpose of what's right for Californians. And I hope that they do that as soon as they can.
And Tim, I guess this is a big thing to hit upon because if we still have these dry conditions throughout most of California for the rest of the year, if we don't get the same rain year that we've had in these last couple of years, we're going to see an incredibly dry period throughout most of the state. And I'm sure that, unfortunately, what we've been seeing as we've seen these last several summers is that means that there's the chance for wildfires to pop up. And of course, that won't be just limited to the Santa Ana events that we've been seeing in Southern California. That's throughout the rest of the state. And particularly, we think about those wooded areas in Northern California.
Yeah, let's be real. I mean, I've grown up in California, like, I think, Tal has as well, and Will, and I'm from the Los Angeles area, and in a part of the Los Angeles area in the foothills. We had fires every single year, wildfires. Certainly nothing on the scale like we've seen, in this past week. However, this is not a crisis, or wildfire is not new to California. And certainly the state has to be better prepared year after year for something that has occurred for centuries in this state. And as growth and development have increased, obviously we have to deal with the realities of that growth and development, in those foothill regions, in some of those wildfire regions, and be able to prevent and protect not only property, but lives as well. But this shouldn't be new to any member of the California political electorate, particularly the governor. This was something that was talked about in 2018 when the governor ran for the office, talking about wildfire and wildfire mitigation and things that need to be done and can be done. So the fact that we've had management failures at various steps of the way at the state, even the county and the city level in Los Angeles should rightly so, make people upset and make people angry, because these are not things that were not unforeseen. Certainly, as I mentioned, the scale of this fire is unlike anything we've ever seen before. However, there are failures and management failures along the way that probably made the devastation and destruction worse than what it really needed to be. Certainly we'll have to go back and take a look at that. But these are policy issues that the state of California should have been well prepared for, and even the city of Los Angeles should have been well prepared for. And the fact is that they weren't.
I think the big thing to note is that California is well funded for firefighting. Even the Newsom administration, I mean, there have been things about trying to come out about cutting for things from certain budgets. People have tried to fact check him. He has increased the size of the firefighting force in California. He's increased a number of his firefighting programs within his budget. That said, it seems the main criticism is, as it always comes down to be, is spending overall. And when you look at spending into other things, most notably when he was down here on Monday of last week on the eve of the fires, is for high-speed rail, and the analysis of the breakdown in cap and trade, where $942 million in cap and trade goes to high-speed rail, and only 81 goes to firefighting prevention. Another 81, I think, goes to something else that has to do with fire, I think, forest management. And so you're looking at essentially a near 9-to-1 funding from your cap and trade, this emissions cost, going back into transportation as opposed to maybe what it could be used for, which would be reducing the risks of wildfires throughout the state. And it's not to say, again, not to say that California is not already well funded and doesn't spend enough on firefighting already, but there are other areas where the criticism has been there could be more funding towards those areas. Are these other areas of spending really necessary in the large scheme of things? And Tal, I'll go to you first. I mean, is California, from what we've seen in this last week, well prepared for fires year round?
I mean, I think the answer is clearly no. It's not going particularly well at the moment. I do think there is a temptation, certainly on the part of any policymaker of any political stripe in most cases, to put more resources towards something. I think you can look at a number of different issues in California, education probably being the clearest, where the amount of money spent does not necessarily give a result that we're looking for. So in this particular case, the best thing to do would probably be to move aside bad policy, allow for the state of California, whether it's firefighters or developers making decisions on where to build commercial and residential properties, whether it's voters deciding where to locate their families, do what we can do to attack this very significant problem. Even from an environmental standpoint, imagine for a moment that all of us are proper environmentalists. We live in tree houses, we wear hemp suits, whatever it is. This is terrible for the environment. So all the good, air quotes, good work that's been done on the policy front to protect California's environment, a good way to undo all of that progress is one of these significant fires. So I would hope that whoever's in charge of this sort of environmental special interests, it's unfortunately not necessarily environmentalists. It's often been captured by lawyers and those that benefit from litigation and suing entities and things like that. But the proper environmentalists, I hope, will migrate down from Southern California. We can all meet right here in Bakersfield, actually, and let's get together and go after solving this problem, not as a means to sue governments or businesses for settlements that then get distributed to these NGOs and lawyers as a result, but actually do whatever it's going to take to stop the fires. And if that means welcoming the now cobwebbed timber industry back to California, they're equipped to take this fuel out of the forest. Let's bring them in to do it, even for a decade or so, but do whatever it takes to stop the fires, not more resources or more debating in Sacramento. Get to work now, because this won't be the last one, and the next one might even be bigger.
That's an important thing to note there, too, when we think about the ways that this fire was fought, and especially in the canyon areas of the Palisades, is that obviously when the fires burn, it's bad for the environment. But what's the way to fight the fire that's climbing up a canyon ridge to prevent it from burning down another canyon ridge? Is you set back fires to burn out any remaining vegetation, and that's setting more fires to make the environment worse. But that's what you have to do to protect homes in the meantime, and it's a last resort measure in this particular situation, as we saw over the weekend. I mean, more planned ones are called controlled burns, and there's questions about whether or not we can be doing more of those, especially in some of these areas that have really experienced a lot of growth over the last couple of years because of those two really intensive rain seasons. And Tim, a big thing to you too. I mean, the question will be is on CEQA, which Tal talked about earlier, which is why was this the exception here? The response to that usually is, well, look at all the funding that we got to you through grants and loans, through the federal government and all this. That money eventually, number one, runs out at some point, if depending on who's there to get it fastest, who can afford assessments, uh, things like that. And then on top of that too, it's not an easy process to try and access loan funding and grant money, and that's a whole delay in and of itself. To eventually get that funding back, it can be a years long process to try to recoup. And in the meantime, you're trying to find a home to live in and a place for your family.
Yeah, no, 100%. And what you have here, obviously, as I said, prior, is the governor received a lot of criticism coming out of the box, as well as the mayor of Los Angeles, in terms of how they were managing some of the resources and things that were going on, and also decisions that had been made. I think an attempt at an olive branch by the governor, especially particularly because you have an area, and let's be honest, Palisades, and that is an area that you have a lot of Hollywood. You've got a lot of it's a wealthier community, and these are kind of part of the governor's crowd, and really who when it comes down to it, that the governor looks to and is going to have to count upon in the future for his political career. So the fact that he is making some of these gestures in this instance that he has not necessarily made before, I think is part of that political calculation, unfortunately, because these are the types of decisions that should have been made regardless of where you have disaster and where you have these instances occur throughout the state of California. But going back to, something that you said, certainly I'm not here and I'm not an expert in firefighting, and I'm not going to second guess anything that the firefighters do. But looking at the issue of management, you have a tremendous criticism coming from the fire chief of the city of Los Angeles, talking about being able to do certain things and being able to equip. And as Tal said, it isn't necessarily a question of how much we're spending, but what we're spending on, and also giving these professionals and these experts the ability to do certain things, and then have the resources available so that they can attack these wildfires, prevent these wildfires, and do things that they need to do using the best expertise and the best ability that they have. And that's part of management, and so much in California, you've got these handcuffs on what people can and can't do with the funding that they do receive. That's something to look at as well.
And last thing I want to touch on too, or last two questions I have. The first of which was continue this optics, this look of what the state looks like. Obviously, I think it's been so, and Tim, you touched on it, just everyone's been so zeroed in on Mayor Bass and Governor Newsom as far as what's going on in Los Angeles. As we take it further north into the Central Valley, I think one of the big things that we've been looking at, Tim, has been the fact that the state legislature was still trying to meet for this special session into protecting the state against Trump. And when you look at how well funded people in California who want to fight these kinds of things are already, the question about whether the state needs this money or whether $25 million, I mean, and then there's potentially more money coming into this too, could be used fighting these fires in some sort of respect, right? And the optics of having to do this session while people are losing their homes in Los Angeles is not great, to say the least. What did you make of what we've seen this week? And of course, the one thing I want to note from our CNN affiliate in Sacramento is that it seems like from Ashley Zaval's reporting, like there has been a bit of a delay in the hearings that are going on up there. So maybe that's something that's an improvement. But what are the optics of that going on in Sacramento at the same time Los Angeles is burning?
Look, the legislature needs to wake up, because if they do not, they're going to face a reckoning from the people of California, because they're not dealing with the issues that are impacting the people here of California. They're dealing with political issues happening a country away, and something that they really can't impact. The people of California, the voters, want the state legislature, want the governor to deal with these issues that are facing them here and now, whether it's from fires, the cost of living, public safety. We haven't even touched upon the fact, and this will impact everybody, regardless of where you live in California, and already has, the fact that it is almost impossible to get fire insurance, and that's going to get worse after these fires. For anyone living in a high fire danger area in California, absolutely impossible to get fire insurance and homeowners insurance. You have insurance companies leaving the state, canceling policies at a record rate. Millions of people are having trouble getting homeowners insurance or having their policies canceled. These are the issues that are impacting when somebody gets that letter in the mail from their homeowners insurance saying, "Hey, you've got, X number of days because we're canceling your homeowners insurance," and they really don't have to give that great of a reason to do that. Those are things that the voters here in California are going to look to the legislature and the governor and say, "Hey, this is a real problem, and we need to have this fixed." And right now, the legislature is worried with, at least the majority in the legislature is worried about everything but these issues.
And Tal, that last question I mean, really, that's a good point, Tim. I mean, we could do a whole another 5, 10 minutes on the insurance aspect of it. I think Tal, the last question is, it's such a unique time for this to happen, not only because it's out of the typical quote unquote fire season, but also because we have a new president in 9 days or less than 9 days, 7 days from now, in a week or so. What is the relationship going to be, or what should we expect from that relationship going in? As cynical and I think as many people don't like the Trump approach of, especially because we're in California, of that's potentially we're going to shut off the valve as far as federal funding is concerned until you do something differently. Is that the approach that we should be expecting him to take and that this administration to take coming in? And is there, and as much as people would be upset, especially those people who have lost their lives and livelihoods, is that a fair? Is there a hint of truth in that things should have to change before the federal government goes in and spends more money in the state?
So I think there's the likely scenario, and this is not partisan in the sense that both sides do it. It's not uncommon for a particular state of a different color than the president to sue that president, sort of whoever the attorney general is, or if Texas did the same thing with the Biden administration and the Obama administration. We're going to plan on doing the same thing with the Trump administration as Californians. That's not a bad political idea, in that it raises no one knows who the attorney general is until they're on the news every night because they're suing, in this case, the Trump administration about whatever thing that is, too conservative for deep blue California. However, there is an aspirational approach where the governor of California, and for that matter, the attorney general, could look and say, all right, here's all the reasons that the federal that this issue is as much a federal problem as is the state problem. And the federal lands in California are super poorly managed. They could very easily say through an EO, federal EO, through reconciliation, through CR, any number of other vehicles that will come out of DC, equip California, arm California with the ability to rein in this problem as soon as possible. That's probably not even funding. I mean, there will be funding, there'll be FEMA and things like that, but Governor Newsom could look to the Trump administration and say, listen, we've not gotten along, but people are suffering. We need your help. We need your help in helping manage the federal lands. That's an appropriate, I think, fair criticism. And we need you to untie our hands to move quickly to mitigate this risk. That would actually eventually impact the insurance market as well, because the insurance guys, no one likes insurance folks. However, they basically have to go make the case that they raise rates based on risk. And it looks like in this particular case, they were right, because you saw a bunch of cancellations right before a giant fire, right? So if you start to mitigate the risk of the fire through veg management, you can employ grazing tactics. You can have cattle on certain lands that are naturally overgrown with veg. There's all kinds of things you can do if you set aside for a moment the special interest of environmental groups, some of whom are fighting battles from 60 years ago. Many of these laws aren't even applicable anymore because you don't even have the same practices that originally led to them in the first place. So I think there's a path that Governor Newsom, and he's very smart, he's clever, could look to sort of put it back on the Trump administration to empower Californians to solve these problems in the best interest of everybody. Will they do that, or they'll take the overtly political route? I think your viewers likely know, but we can hope for the best if nothing else.
And of course, as we think about this situation too, when we're thinking about aspirational, something very important to note with Rob Bonta, somebody who has known interest of wanting to run for governor in this state too, and anything to increase the profilability has been seemingly what this administration has wanted to do for some time is finding ways to get on media. It's a very it's not to say from a cynical perspective that it's the approach just to get the name out there of those individuals that are in those seats, but it's also, if you're looking at it from their approach it too, it may be just to get as much information out there as possible. But also, it's something that has been taken much criticism of, especially in these last few days when we've seen the activity of the governor's office on X and on social media and trying to fact check people that are posting, whether or not they're erroneous claims or not, just everything that comes out. There's a question of what use of the time should be focused on that. Obviously, it's not the governor doing every single thing, but where can different things be allocated to make the situation that the people who are, suffering and have lost their homes and lives in the Palisades and in Altadena feel any better? And I think that'll be a big question about government management too. It'll be interesting to see the response to that in the polls going forward, as far as what he looks like nationally, and of course here in the state, as far as his political career goes forward. And it's not something we really want to think about his political career in moments like these, but this is what he's inviting criticism on himself for by continuing to roll out this media strategy that he's done. Whether that's fair or not, it's what has happened, and it's what people who have suffered and have lost their homes and lives again have had to look at in the meantime of having to try to rebuild. So something important to note there too. Thank you both so much. Appreciate your time. I know that everyone here, I think, is touched in some way by the fires. So to be able to do this and to talk for a little bit and push out a news story for later, we appreciate it. So thank you again so much.
Yeah, thanks, Will.